Welcome to Cyborg 86. Today we're going to tear down this little Jiabaile mini crawler and see what's what. Here's the tools we'll be using today. From left to right, we have a small hobby Phillips screwdriver and a small jeweler's Phillips screwdriver. I use a standard screwdriver, but that can be substituted. The small silver bit there is a hex bit in size 0.9. You could do a hex driver as well. That's just what I have. Next is a nut driver in size 3.2. And just to the right of those bright red things are 3D printed versions that I made up. To the right of that, tweezers. Those come in handy for popping off the links from the ball ends if you decide to do it that way. And I definitely recommend some thread lock on the wheel nuts. Prior video, we took off the body and had a look at that. But in this one, we're going to tear it down, open up the axles, look at the gearbox, look at the gears. Before we do that, let's do a baseline with some weight here. I got some mods in progress, and this will serve to help me tell what improvements or non-improvements I might have made. A total of 108 grams, and then 48 grams of that's on the front, 68 on the back, so we got some rear bias on there, no surprise. Plus a little bit of rounding error. The body has two clips that hold it to the frame. They're both up underneath, behind the front wheels. Just be careful as you pull it apart. Don't put too much pressure on the wheels or the axles. Don't want to bust nothing. The bumpers and the electronics are screwed up to the body there. So we'll go ahead and pull those out. There's also one in the middle I found after pointing to these. The front bumper popped right off, but I couldn't get the back one off as easy. Actually, once I got the screws out, I figured out that I need to kind of pry. It's kind of held on by little plastic lips there in the yellow. So I had to pry the rear bumper off just with my fingers even after I got all the screws out. You'll see that in a second. And since it wasn't coming off, I decided, well, maybe that back wheel needs to come off. But turns out it did not. I ended up taking all those screws out, and it's just screwed into the body. There's nothing that it's holding as far as the electronics or bumper. So this is not required to take it down. And here's where I finally got a clue and figured out that the bumper's held on by those clips there. So you just kind of squeeze it, pop them out of there, and finally it'll come. And now that that's out, the circuit board should slide right out of there. Battery pack's at 200 milliamp. Plugs in right there. Everything's built into this circuit board. You got the switch and the charging unit. You got all the LED lights, the speed control, and the receiver, all built into one. I'll be using this in one of my die-cast conversions, and I happen to have one that the whole board will fit in. But I'm kind of thinking that maybe the front could be cut clear off of that board and not affect anything but the LED lights. I think that's the only thing that's up there. So I might risk it, I might not, but we'll see. I'll be using this little tray I designed to keep screws in. It's got a tapered front there, so it's easier to pull them out. You don't have to dig around in the corners to get stuff out. That's out on Thingiverse and Maker World if you're interested. Prints up in just a few minutes. I printed a few of them. They're super handy. Now that I got it apart, I want to do a little more weighing here. Looks like I got the body and the wheel in there. 39.5 grams. Add the battery, it's another 10 grams. So 45 of those original 105 grams are all up in the body or above. So lots of weight up high. Just the inner part of the body, the blackout windows, are 15 grams alone. Heavier in the body. Body's under 13 grams. Now we'll do the chassis here with the wheels on, the servo transmission in it. Basically everything but the electronics in the body. That's at 56 grams. And we already weighed the spare tire, but not alone, so we'll stick that on there, and we got just about 6 grams. One of my viewers suggested I put some of these 2mm BBs inside the wheel. Could put that up front, add a little weight, should roll around, stay on the bottom. So I got those. I'll try them out sometime. There were no tools included with this, so I'm using the one off the X43 to get the nuts off of there. They're kind of inset, so unless you got a tool that fits it, might be a pain. I tried it with a needle nose pliers and it just wouldn't do it for me with the ones I had. So anyway, that's an FYI if you decide to tear this down. Before I bought the nut driver, I ended up using this little driver from the X43. So if you got an X43 around, that thing will work too. So here what I'm going to do is go ahead and pull the wheel off the X43, the stock wheel. And just for kicks, I wanted to see if one off of the Jiabaile would fit on there. So let's have a look at that. And it does fit the axle, though it doesn't fit the body real well. But hey, now we know. Works the other way too. Here's a better shot of the X43 wearing the Jiabaile tire. So, I don't know, maybe if you clearanced it a bit. Here's an Orlando Hunter rim that I have. And the axle's too small for that, so not a good fit. For those of you that have an X43, here's a look at it next to their Jiabaile for size comparison. The designs are very, very similar. I also checked out the servos here, checking to see if the same size. And it looks to me like they are the same servo, or at least very close. The difference being the X43 has the back of the servo case removed and the guts are just taped in. The outer chassis on the Jiabaile measures in at 21 millimeter, where the X43 is 19. So that tells me that the transmission case is not the same, though it's very similar. The transmission is held in by 2 Phillips screws on each side, and then the links have ball ends, and that's where you need the hex drive, the .09. Alternatively, you can just pop off the ball ends using the tweezers. I've done this a number of times, and it seems to work just fine. Don't know if I'd recommend doing it a lot, as it'll wear out over time. I've also found that the hex inside the ball ends can strip out. It apparently is soft metal, so pick your poison. The links connect to the chassis, 2 on the outside and 2 on the inside. The links on the outside are easy enough to get to with the tweezers or with the hex bit, but the ones on the inside you can just get to with the tweezers. Or if you pull the transmission out, then you can get to it with the hex bit. Unlike the SCX24, you don't have to remove the links to pull out the transmission. You can just pull that straight out. Say, for example, you want to do a motor swap. Very easy to do. Just the 2 Phillips screws on each side and pull it out. I found that when I put it back together too, it's pretty easy to get in. You just set the transmission up a little high, make sure you align the drive shafts, and then push it back in. Here's a look. Well, we're not going to come this far and just quit, so let's tear the transmission apart. What's nice about this rig is just about all the screws are the same size. I think the Phillips screws are all the same size, and then the ball ends are all the same, and then there's just a couple machine screws that go on the cross members in the chassis. You might notice that it looks odd here in that the bigger gear is the one that comes off the motor. So it's the opposite of gear reduction. However, all the gear reduction happens in a little gearbox that's attached to the motor. We'll see that in a second. I took this video quite a while ago, and I can't remember if it was necessary to take these screws out, but once I did, everything came apart. I definitely didn't want to keep prying on that white gear and risk cracking it. So now we got the motor out. You can see there's a gearbox attached to it, and there's a whole bunch of tiny little gears in there. If you have an Orlando Hunter, that'll look familiar to you, though it usually has an N20 motor attached to it instead of this little one. Here I wanted to compare to the X43. So the one you're seeing right here, the brass one, is out of the LDARC X43, and the nylon one is out of the Jiabaile. They look very similar, maybe the same size, but I didn't want to swap them and mess things up. Here I'm trying to see if the X43 and the Jiabaile drive shafts are interchangeable. They are not. The length, of course, is different, but also the diameter of the shaft. Here's some I have for the Orlando Hunter, so we're going to try those while we're at it. And this one has a larger diameter than the Jiabaile. So no Goldilocks fit this time. Now I did happen to have some more Orlando Hunter parts. Here's the head of a shock. And I thought, let's go ahead and see if this hardware, how this works. So I wanted to see if the shock could fit on the ball end. Yep. This video was taken before I put the brushless motor in there, and I was just testing to see. And yeah, the brushless motor will fit in the Jiabaile. And if you've been following my channel, you'll also know that I put the same brushless motor in the X43 43rd scale. Crazy smooth. So it is very easy to fit a brushless motor in this. Same one as for the Orlando Hunter. Now, fitting the electronics in, that's another story. But it can be done. If you'd like to see the brushless motor in the Jiabaile or in the X43, you should check out those videos on my channel. Next I'm going to pull off the axles and open them up for you. You're getting the whole show today. So when I look at this servo here on the front axle, it does have a little holder, but it is glued in there. It's not screwed, it is glued. And it's pretty tight too. And to take that front axle apart, there are 2 Phillips screws on the bottom, but there are 2 more screws underneath the servo. So the servo has to be removed in order to take the axle clear apart. Yep. We're going to set that aside and work on the rear axle. We will do the front one too, but I got to work up my nerve first. This housing is put together the same way. So it has 2 Phillips screws on the bottom, and then it has 2 ball ends on the top that hold links, but they also hold the housing together. At each end of the axle housing, there are 2 more Phillips screws. Again, these screws are all the same size, which is super nice. Keeps you from getting them mixed up. Alright, so I don't recommend that you do this unless you absolutely have to, because getting it together is a little bit of a bear, but even more so on the front. But here's the magic. Now we know. See some bearings in there? That's nice. See some nylon gears? That ought to be sufficient for this little scale. No surprises in here, really. Now, if you do take this apart, be extra careful to note which way the gears are facing, because it looks to me like this axle is reversible. So if you put that thing in the wrong way, and you got the front one facing the other way, and you get it all together, you're going to be very disappointed. So fortunately for me, I had it on camera, so I know which way it's going. Now we'll have a look at the front axle. And I actually took this video earlier when I popped the axle there, as you can see. Nothing broke, it just popped apart. I couldn't fix it the easy way, so I tore it clear down. So this is some video clips from that'll explain it. And here's a point where I find out it is glued in. So we're going to have to do more work than I was hoping to do, because we're going to have to break that servo loose without breaking the mount or the servo. So more tear down to do. We're going to pull the steering linkage off. And here I'm trying one more time to take the shortcut, see if I can make that work, and it's not going to happen. Didn't work out, so we're going the long route. I started going ahead to remove the servo. I'm just using a blade here to try to crack open the glue between the mount and the servo itself. Tedious and takes a while. I'll do it in fast motion so you don't have to wait it out. If you're doing this, just be careful not to pry too hard, get too eager, because you could crack the servo mount. It's kind of brittle plastic. It's not real flexible, so that's a good point to watch out for. Here I'm trying to pry it anyway, and I can't even get a screwdriver under there, so I'd say just keep working it with the knife. And I'm glad I was patient. Got it out of there intact, including the mount. So nothing broken, nothing cracked. And if you look real close, there's 2 screws, and those screws have to come out in order to get to the other screws. This will remove the servo mount. Now these 2 screws are shorter than the others, So take mind of that and keep it separate, because you don't want to put a long screw in here. I think it'll drive right through into the gears. And finally, I'm getting to the screws that hold in the links and the rest of the axle. Now at this point, I did tear the whole axle apart to kind of show you, but I kind of wish I had left the one screw in, the Phillips screw on the top at the end that was intact, because since I took it all apart, it was really hard to get it back together. So it would have been good if I'd have left one end intact, and I would suggest that if you got one that popped out, don't take the whole thing apart like I did. But now you know what it looks like inside, and so do I. But if you do happen to take it clear apart, make sure you get that axle back in the same direction in the axle housing, because it is reversible. And I'd hate to have you put it back together and have the front wheels turning backwards while the back wheels turns forward. That'd be a real bummer, because you'd have to redo the whole process again. So take note of that and be careful. Okay, so a lot of this video now is just me fiddling around trying to figure out the best way to get it back together, because it keeps wanting to fall apart. The shaft will slide in there. I can't get it to line up with them pins. It's a real pain. So here's a few tips for you if you have to do this. First of all, make sure you got them steering knuckles facing forward on the axle. You don't want them accidentally facing backwards. You could have some trouble there. Also make sure the axle... Actually make sure the axle is facing upright. Very important. Okay, so once everything's facing the right way, I'd start with the bottom half of the axle housing. Put the long shaft in, not the short one yet. Then make sure the bearings are aligned and things like that on the shaft. Then you can take the wheel hub and press the kingpin down into the axle housing. And while you're doing that, you got to get the pins aligned with that little wheel cup. That's the pain point right there. I wish I could show and describe it better than that, but boy, these things are small. And now you can kind of hold it there like you're seeing here. So I only got half the axle housing. I got everything lined up. I'll probably drop it again. Yep. Frustrated. Anyway, once you get that set, then you can go ahead and apply the second half of the axle housing and set it on there. And do one end and put one screw in to fasten it. So remember that little shaft will slide back and forth in there, so you can push it from the other end to get it to line up with the wheel again if it comes loose. So once you get the one Phillips screw in at that end, then it's a lot safer to handle it, though not perfect. And then the other end's just the same way. So that's why I'd say don't take it apart if you don't need to, because you can do it by prying the axle housings apart, the two halves. You can do it that way just on one end. Here I am kind of working on the other side. Takes a lot of fiddling. I've cut a lot of the fiddling out. Also, I put the drive shaft in. I didn't think to show you that. You do that right before you put the second half on. So that's a pretty complicated step, but once you get to this point, it's actually easier, though it doesn't look like it. Now it looks like I'm finally there, so I'm going to go ahead and put another screw in, and then it should be pretty safe to handle. Definitely do not over tighten these. Just tighten them up finger tight and call it good. Now might be a good point to double check one more time to make sure your drive shafts, when you turn them the same direction, that the wheels all turn the same direction. Very important, and it'd be a lot easier to fix it now. Now it's reassembly, and I'm just going to put this on fast forward while I go through this. I will pause in a little bit when we get to the servo. Remember that removing the transmission wasn't a necessary step. I did that for other purposes. So we'll get to that part. I'll show you how to install it in case you take it out, but it's super easy. Actually, this thing is much easier than working on the X43 just because of the extra space. Also, when you're putting these screws into the metal chassis, you may want a little blue Loctite on there just to keep from wiggling loose. I haven't had a problem with that, but metal on metal, I tend to do that. The servo mount has a kind of a press fit, two circles that go over each other, and that works pretty well to hold it while you put the screws in. Remember to use the two short screws that you took out before. Very important to get that right, I think. I haven't done it wrong, but I can imagine what would happen. Recall that the servo was glued in originally, and I really didn't want to use CA glue, but I've tried hot glue before on similar material on the X43 and it didn't hold. So I decided to go ahead and CA glue it. I tried to put it in spots where I thought I could break it open again with the blade if I needed to. Now I can go ahead and put the servo in. It's positioned with the steering arm over on the left, just like normal. And when you slide it back in, you'll feel a little click. It kind of clamps in there. Not strong enough to hold it on its own, thus the glue, but it'll be pretty good. You'll know when you get it set in there. By the way, if you ever take the transmission out, it's easy to install. Looking at the drive shafts there, they both appear the same length on both ends. So it's kind of centered. I think that sits just a little bit forward because there's a little bit of a bigger gap in the rear drive shaft there, but I just kind of line it up on top, make sure it's set, and then I line up one shaft, front or back, either one works. Probably the back would be better, and get that one lined up. Then for the other one, it's just handy to have some tweezers. You can just kind of line it up that way, twist the wheel a little bit, line the shafts inside, and then it'll kind of pop in place, and you're sitting pretty good. Not too bad. Now you just put the transmission in place to align it with the screw holes. This is what I like about this. You know, like if you're working on the SCX24, the links are part of the skid plate. But here the links all attached to the frame, and you don't have to worry about that when you're working with the transmission. Here I'm just going to do a quick test. I'll plug in the wires. Actually, I plugged in the wire wrong because I plugged in it upside down. I should have flipped it before hooking this up. But I'm just doing a quick test run. Anyway, we'll turn it on. Make sure the wheels all rotate the right direction. Don't fight against each other. And we're looking good. I did notice that steering was off just a little bit. I hadn't put the screw in the servo yet, the servo horn. So I'm just moving it one tooth to get it going nice and straight. And now we're looking good again. And so I'll put the servo horn screw in. And I just got it started, and then I thought, you know what, I better shut this thing off so the servo isn't fighting me and possibly stripping out. And then I'll hold on to the servo horns. These things got to be weak. Again, just a little bit of finger tight, and that's all it needs. One last tip here is when you're putting the body on, it might be tempting to push on the wheels or the axles. I would not do that. Just go ahead and push on the frame right there in the middle. And you might need to push in from the side, but right behind the wheel, but still push on the frame there, not on the wheel. And it should be set. You'll hear it snap in, and then you can play. If I learn anything else about this, I'll put it in the description, so be sure to have a look there. I hope you found this interesting. If you'd like to check out my other videos, I do stuff with X43s and all the way up to the 18 scale. I do brushless, even down to the X43. As far as I know, I'm the only one that's done it. Anyway, check it out, and happy crawling.
I'll think it over. Are you sure there ain't